What's up, everyone? It is 3 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, which means you're tuning in to Cannabis Legalization News. Today, we are joined by Josh Kincaid from The Talking Hedge. We're going to get into creating the perfect pitch deck for your cannabis business. So let's just get right into it, unless you guys have some news to talk about.
Yeah, there's always something to talk about.
Yeah, it is always something to talk about. And thank you so much for joining us, Josh. We're going to be talking all about pitch decks and where they fit in on your capital raise for your cannabis business.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Josh, why don't you familiarize yourself with the audience just one more time?
Oh, I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm a capital market analyst with a boutique advisory firm called the Super Chronics. We help our clients either get capital or find strategic partners, create vertically integrated buyout opportunities, and a lot of that starts with the pitch deck. So we're going to talk about maybe the 7 tips to a successful pitch deck, as well as 8 pitfalls to avoid. If we can get through all of that, you guys got to stick through all of it, though, to the very end.
I've seen some of your previous ones with the attorney, the investor lady.
Yeah, Katrina Glogowski is an angel investor and attorney. She's put a lot of money into the industry, from grows to tech, PR, magazines, you name it. So she's got a lot of experience. So I get her on the podcast at least once a month to dive through some pitch decks. We just did one for MedMen, and you'll have to stay tuned for that one. That was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one. And Josh and I are actually going to be putting together a course that we're going to be offering over at cannabisindustrylawyer.com. Right now, we're kind of building the video content that'll go on the top of this course. And so for that course, we're going to go through and we're going to create this type of pitch deck for the putative, which means, potential. It's an example. Vertically integrated cannabis company. And then so you'll see each one of these will be in a lesson. And I believe it's going to be a 13 deck slide that you guys can then download after you take it. So head on over to Cannabis Industry Lawyer and subscribe to our newsletter. And then you will get notice when we have launched the course.
Yeah, the pitch deck is so important. I actually met your friend, again, her name's Katrina. I met her at an investor event years ago. I went to one. Downtown Seattle, you're on the top of the 30th floor. It was a pitch event with Vuber, and there was a couple other ones. They were asking for like 1.5 million. And it was neat to see the presentation. It's kind of like your resume, right? Like you're asking people to employ you, or rather give you money.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to kind of get everything in line and tell people what you want without like one of the funniest things I got recently, as a matter of fact, was out of a South American. I don't remember if it was Colombia or Venezuela, but this guy actually put in one of the line items that he wanted $30,000 for a wardrobe and $80,000 for a car because it was important for him to look successful rather than be successful. And so,
but the other thing is, who the heck is going to pay cash for that car when they could have just rented it and be like, okay, and also rent those clothes. Now take some pictures.
It's great.
Back in your sweatpants,
The problem is, I think Dan Blazarian has given the wrong impression of what's successful. I mean, the fact.
I don't know. Josh, did Dan Blazarian's pitch deck ever come across your desk?
No, I would love to see that, though, and how he was able to spend $50 million on marketing. Because if I can buy a yacht and slap on, Super Chronics on the side of it and call that marketing, then hey, sign me up. And the other one is MedMen throwing $26 million at a Hollywood mansion. Like, how were they not in prison? Because I never learned that in business school.
Well, I still don't understand why they're paying full price for these things. It's not going to hide the money any better. It could have been a line item, and then you should have had a contract with another management firm and you just suck the money out that way. But these guys are too awesome to do things the correct way.
So that's how Warner Brother does it, as a matter of fact. Like if Harry Potter or any other movie, those people get no extra money because the studios will hook up, they'll start another company and then they'll charge each other like hundreds of millions of dollars for fees that aren't worth anything. And then that's how you legally siphon money away so that you can't give dividends or profits or whatever.
Right. That's right. Give us some likes and some thumbs ups for getting the real straight dope on how businesses downstream cash flows to avoid tax liability. You get that here, folks. And that's why you're going to want to sign up for this course on pitch decks. We're going to break them all down. And so one of the things that you wanted to start the course with is start with the why. What do you mean by that, Josh?
Start with the why?
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean?
I mean, all right. So in your pitch deck, what should you lead with?
First thing I would start with is identifying a business plan goals. And I guess that's what you meant by why. Is like, why are you setting this up? So essentially, if you don't identify your business plan goals right off the bat, instead you have like your total addressable market. Like, we don't care how many billions of dollars the industry is worth. Tell me what you're doing. Identify your business plan goals so that I know immediately what I'm looking at.
Word.
So like for a pitch deck though, is this for businesses who are already active or even for like a new business?
Well, it's a sign of the times, Miggy, and that's a good point because, circa 2017, 2018, when we were doing the pitch deck reviews, it was okay to be pre-revenue. So if you had an idea, that's fine. But, post beer virus, that doesn't work anymore. So when I got a pitch deck out of Brazil and this guy wants to buy a license and then, change the laws, like it's not even like federally legal yet. It's not, like that's a wrong time. So right now you need to be generating revenue, and even more importantly, you should be profitable.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if we were going to stack a pitch deck for a vertically integrated startup, because a lot of the future businesses in this cannabis industry is one state after another, and we're about to have maybe 4 more go into the legalization states, how do they put together a good pitch deck for a vertically integrated cannabis company?
I think that's going to be a majority of the 7 tips to a successful investment deck. So looking at all of these things, I would incorporate all of that because it's important to not only have your partnership, but also you want to be able to hit the market. So if you know your audience and you can understand the market, but even more importantly, the team. Right. Most investors are going to want to know, if you're vertically integrated, that you know what you're doing, you know who your target audience is, you've identified those needs and roadblocks, but even more importantly, that you have a team to make that happen, because the amount of money that they put into MedMen as a multi-state operator and then found out that they had to fire the CEO and completely revamp that entire business, that's tough to do. That's hard to then reestablish that trust.
Well, and we got a question from one of the people watching to ask if do you need a business plan if you're not seeking investors? I would think a mission statement would be enough, but I mean, the whole purpose of a pitch deck is to get investors, right? Like the whole purpose of any of this is to pull in that money towards you to get more, whatever you're doing.
Yeah, really, that's a roadblock that a lot of investors put out there to make sure you've done your own due diligence. They won't look at a business plan, they won't read it, but they want to make sure you have it. Right. And you're going to create a pitch deck from that business plan. So really, if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have an exit strategy, it'd be like creating a restaurant without a menu.
Yeah, I always kind of see the pitch deck as like, all right, let's go 30,000 feet, because if you can't get them with that, they don't want to look at any deeper into that surface. And so, the pitch deck will tell you what you're going to do in about 13 slides, and you can do it as a presentation in about 15 minutes. And then after that, your business plan, it depends on what is it trying to do. Is it going into a private placement memorandum? Is it going into an application for a license? And so then it's going to have a whole bunch of more compliance stuff built into it, or legal requirements built into for it, so that it can be compliant with the securities laws. So yeah, I mean, like, I just think it also helps the teams understand why they are there and what the one thing they're going to do. Miggy, you remember we had Sparky on from Supercritical?
I'm not sure.
All right. Well, the Sparky from Supercritical, the guy who was operating in the Oakland area before 2005.
That's right.
Yeah. Remember him? All right. Well, he said, what were you supposed to do? Think about that one thing that your company does, and that's how you're going to etch out your little market niche in there and sell your product. So that really is something that you can achieve through using a pitch deck to get to that aspect. So Josh, what are the other aspects of your top 7 tips moving on from that one there?
So just to jump on the back of that, you have to know what sets the business apart. So we've already gone through number 1, identify the business plan goals. 2, know your audience. Number 3 is understand the market. 4 is identifying needs and roadblocks. Because if you haven't told people that you have issues to to get through, whether it's regulatory or otherwise, then you haven't really thought out your business plan. And that also goes with number 5, knowing what sets the business apart. Because if you're not any different than the next guy, then why am I going to give you money and not him if it's a better deal? It's like going to the grocery store and looking at a generic olives versus, a brand name olive and spending twice as much. If I don't know what the difference is, I'm going to go for the cheaper one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a stupid analogy, but you get my point.
That, at the end of the day, remember, this is an agricultural commodity. I mean, or like at least it's like artisanal strawberries, which isn't even a product. So, you do have to be cognizant of that and your costs and then who you're going to sell to. And so one of the reasons why the vertical plan is one of the more eye-catching in the cannabis industry, it's like, well, I'm going to be able to make my product and then I'll sell it over there. And so like they can see the supply chain more fully, but that has to grow your team and your expenses by quite a bit. And so suddenly you're not in like, the small time money capital raise. Like in Illinois, we have crowdfunding in Illinois, and it's a $4 million per year cap. You're trying to get into a vertically integrated cannabis company. You're not under $4 million.
Right. Yeah. And that's also peace of mind too, right? Because if you're going to give somebody money, you want to make sure that they're not going to be buying clothes or a $26 million mansion. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that somebody is going to know what the state laws are. And that's why I have Katrina Glogowski, because she's an expert on compliance. Obviously, law is really important. And so having the team in order to make sure that you're able to go from state to state and then stay in business. Miggy, we've seen so many crazy things in Washington where they tried to cap concentrates at 10%, which would nullify the whole concentrate category, and then shapes and colors. And so I've seen business owners spend an entire quarter of a year going through potential legislation and legal issues that would affect their business dramatically. And then the bill just gets dropped. So they just wasted an entire quarter of a year, and that doesn't work for a small business. So you have to have a team that is able to keep moving forward, even when there's regulatory issues and hurdles that you have to go through.
Yeah. Those regulatory issues that you mentioned too. It's funny how there's not more people involved in cannabis. People who are making money from this. That's, I think, what hurt Washington's medical. Right, everybody got happy in their little stores and was making their own money, but when there was a bill coming out, there wasn't no like, hey, let's get our shit together and make it regulated. It was more like, hey, let's see what happens, which killed medical out here. Mm-hmm. And if more people in their states, because it's individual, state by state, got involved in their regulation, because we were talking about before how one of the staples should be, what are you doing for the community? What are you doing for, as an investor, what's the company doing for regulation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the banking industry is required to do that. They have to put in a certain amount of hours into the community because they're kind of an evil corporation. And so in order to get that perception management down and buy people's love, they either have to pay money or they have to put people in. And so when I worked for the banks, we were going to schools and donating money for the toys and fixing up hardscape, landscape, and remodeling schools. And they loved us, but none of them knew that it was required. They all thought that we cared, that the bank cared. And the bank doesn't care. They are obligated to do that. And so I think that the cannabis community wants to do that. And I think that's the fundamental difference, is that there's a lot of altruism in individuals that maybe shouldn't be in business as long as they have. We're starting to see that with this beer virus, that there's going to be some capitulation and closing, and maybe that's going to create a lot more vertically integrated opportunities if you can stay in the game long enough to find that strategic partner.
Beer virus.
I'm trying to avoid the name.
Oh,
I don't want to get demonetized, so I'm not using the pandemic word.
Oh, yes, that was an interesting thing that Miggy had once. He did such a piece on the pandemic name thing earlier, and it had started to trend. And then they took it down, and then later it turned off that like there was actually legitimate news stories, showing cannabinoids and the viral properties of that. Yeah, that
was actually started by an ex-NFL player, Kyle Turley, who said that very, very early on, and he was right. And I thought he was crazy for saying it out loud, because we all know that patent number 6630507 has a neural protectant to hold heavy metals and other things from crossing the blood-brain barrier. We all know that. But once you say it, especially during a sensitive time, then people think you're crazy. But now you have you have scientists using those cannabinoids for the pandemic issue, and now he's not so crazy.
No. I had to say the pandemic is probably the best thing for cannabis because one, it's been labeled essential, and two, it's more people are learning that it has medicinal value.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, again, that patent is now expired. And so like the fact that there was a patent, which means it's 20 years, which is now expired, that says exactly that, cannabis is an antioxidant neuroprotectorant, both THC and CBD. They disclosed both. And who's they? The United States government. They held their own patent through expiration. And so now that cannabis is expired, can we get the plant patent, or could you get a plant patent on this because of that 6630-507 patent? Is that something that would just totally destroy the market, or is it more like a plant patent? So that's a concept for another show when we book an intellectual property lawyer.
Yeah, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more pitch decks and a lot more investment intrigue from places that are far flung. So I think that with the essential business designation that we're seeing, coupled with places like Northern France and Greenland banning alcohol because they're afraid that people staying at home is a danger to children, that was actually stated. And so I think CBD being a gateway into cannabis is drawing more investors. And especially if people understand sin stocks and the inverse relationship they have during economic downturns, that's creating more investment intrigue. And we've seen 52-week lows on some of the stocks, again, creating some FOMO and interest and stuff. So I'm seeing a lot of pitch decks from crazy areas, South America, Europe, Asia, and they're all over the board. A lot of them.
BPM look like there. I mean, Christ, of course, then if we're just drafting this, well, because where's the investment dollar going? Is it going to France or is it going to Nebraska?
I think it's mostly in the US. I don't even think it's in Canada anymore because the expectation is $6.63 versus $1.23 in the US, meaning there's people in Colorado that can manufacture 1 gram for $1 and change versus the publicly traded LPs that are doing it for over $6. So where would you want to invest your money right now?
On the dollar.
Are you seeing more people wanting to be invested in actual the flower part or the store part? Because I think unfortunately because of Washington, how we're horizontal, we made superstars out of store owners, which I don't get. But I always think the farmer should be the focus, the actual place where it came from, right? Where my wine, the brewery, distillery, whatever the F it is, those should be the ones that we talk about. But it's always the store or the white label brand. Are you seeing people wanting to be more hands-on with the flower? Because that event that I saw with Christina, it was mostly the people using a Vuber, which is a vape pen. 2, there was another one which was a Bitcoin transactional type people. So it was all non-flower interactive people.
I am seeing, so the Viridian Capital Deal Tracker is something that comes out weekly. And so I'm able to see both acquisition and M&A transactions. And so the transaction, the number of transactions is decreasing, but the dollar amount per transaction is increasing. And there's more debt than equity. And then to answer your question, there are more investors going after the flower, but I feel like that's in areas like Colorado that are vertically integrated. So the 2 main acquisitions are still multi-state operators because of the assets or the collateral behind that. They still can get the buildings and everything, but people are going more and more after cultivators. Even though it's a commodity and commodities are generally a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, I think that maybe being the cleanest dirty shirt in the room and the lack of opportunities right now, the market is bloated and speculative and people don't really know what to do with it. So they're I guess we'll buy that, So you're seeing more and more grows being purchased. Yes.
I mean, it's recession-proof price. You're talking about the sin, we talked about before.
But it also depends on how much more capacity and demand those grows are. So because cannabis doesn't scale all that easily in the sense that you have to grow the plant. I mean, sure, you can turn it out and you can have a surplus of flower, but it still takes it's still quite labor intensive. Yeah. And so because of that, it's not creating a piece of software and then it just works throughout wherever that portal is throughout the world. Is that one of the reasons why these demands for the cultivators is so high? Because the market for it just keeps growing, and so that the pressure on the cultivators to continue to put out the flower is increasing as well, and that just kind of like creates a throttling of that talent versus the output.
I think that's more optimistic than I'm willing to admit. I think a lot of it with Curaleaf, for example, is agreed. And so 800 million, 900 million to buy these brands and these farms, I think is a way to have, whether there's intellectual property or otherwise, they can basically buy this and slap that price on there. Kind of like Weed Maps having an arbitrary $420 million valuation. I don't think that they're buying it necessarily out of the hopes that this commodity will be profitable long term, because nobody thinks like, oh, I'm going to go buy, a farm and we're going to generate a lot of revenue. That they want to buy a brand, but maybe the immaturity of the market, maybe there's a lack of opportunities. I think that you look at Canopy. They've written off $3 billion. And so like they
written it off. Like that's a charge off. It's like, what happened to that invested capital that we did? And then we just passed. Oh, that's next quarter's problem. And somebody's just taking a fat paycheck. But anyway, one of the questions I wanted to get to is like, what about like, we touched on IP a little bit. Can we have like patent our pitch deck? Can investors like steal our idea?
Yeah. But, so Adeo Rossi of the Founders Institute, which is for investors, he's based out of San Francisco, and he says, no one's going to steal your stupid effing idea. He doesn't say effing, but I don't want to get demonetized. And right. I think that's great because, you can steal an idea, but can you implement it? Like if you don't know what I know, you can try and steal an idea, but you're not going to really be able to implement it to the degree I can. So yes, they could steal it, but are they going to be successful? Probably not.
True story. And then so business plans aren't dead. So at that event that I met Christina, because I asked people, like I'm always inquiring about money. I just like money for some reason. But I asked her and a couple other people, when someone brings a business plan to you, what are you looking for? And one of the things they all told me, which it's hard for me to wrap my head around because I do this because of the social justice and all the other stuff, but an exit strategy. They said, hey, you should have an exit strategy. So a business plan is still needed no matter what, though, right?
Yeah, you still need to do it because, again, if you're creating a restaurant and you don't know what the menu is, how are you going to create the atmosphere, the environment? How are you going to select a chef? And the chef is like your number one asset in a restaurant. So if you haven't created the menu, you can't move forward. And the same thing with the business plan. If you don't have an exit strategy, then you don't really know how to get out of the business. So if you don't know who your target market is, if you don't have a business plan, there's all of these things, including creating a summary. Number 7 on the 7 tips for a successful investment deck is to create a summary with a call to action. And so that's another thing. That's the exit strategy is here's how much we want. Here's the creating FOMO, essentially. This is why you want to invest. And that's really important. And you can't do that without a business plan.
Yeah, you don't want to have to just be taking this pitch on the road. Well, they do that sometimes. They close one round of investing and they go to the next one. But sometimes the people, I think, can get addicted to raising money. And I think a lot of the people started with a pitch deck that had a compelling idea and then a good team. Because if you can steal somebody's idea and they're kind of like fungible in the sense that one idea could be taken and placed over there, but you can't have me do it. You're going to have somebody else that's on that team doing it and taking care of the actual execution of the deal. And so when you're looking at that team, it's really important that, especially if you're vertically integrated, like who do you have that knows about retail? All right, where? How much do they know about retail? All right, who's growing? How much are they growing? Security. All right. And so all these pieces need to come in. And then, of course, like if you had somebody who was financial, who's taking care of like papering all this so we're raising this money appropriately. That's another thing. That's, is that going to be a member of your team? It's pretty interesting. And then that was something that, one of the things that we were talking about earlier, all these types of slides that you need. We're going to go through the types of slides that we have in the pitch deck that we're going to be building in the course. One of them, we were joking, was, well, cannabis is pretty much the only industry where it looks like you might need a whole slide for regulatory hurdles and or compliance. because you might need to like say, hey, these are the market challenges or the political challenges more than market challenges. Here's our strategies to deal with each one of them.
Yeah, no
well, that's
doubt.
number 4 is needs and roadblocks, and compliance is always the thing. You have to plan for the unplanned. You have to, even if you're like in concentrates. Well, so there was a vape company in Washington. They started making pre-rolls because during VapeGate, what else are you going to sell? So you kind of have to plan for the unplanned.
Well, you've also dealt with Cecilia and her working around the CBD drink, because now it's a little packet of powder when they were trying to come out.
Yeah, so August of 2018, Washington followed California banning CBD beverages, and she launched at HempFest, and then literally like 2 weeks after HempFest, around September 1st, 2018, Washington implemented that law banning CBD. So how do you pivot to stay relevant? You know, she ended up relocating to Nevada. A lot of people don't have that as an opportunity. If you have kids or a house or whatever, how can you just up and move to another recreational state? It's not really that feasible for the majority of folks.
Yeah. Just literally political risk. You could be out of business tomorrow, or there could be millions of competitors tomorrow.
Seriously, because you guys covered some really good pitch decks in the past, and I've seen you called some red flags out. What are some of the big standouts you've seen that people have done?
Well, I think, so like the 8 red flags for pitching to investors is the incorrect founding team. So Ignite would be a perfect example. Is Dan Blazarian really the guy that you want to give $50 million to? Come to find out, he's getting sued right now because his dad was a scammer too. So his dad had to leave the United States for Armenia, and he hasn't been able to come back to the United States. Armenia doesn't have extradition. And so Dan Blazarian's dad was actually running Ignite the entire time, not Dan. Dan was just with models on a boat. And so that he's in court right now because he defrauded $25 million and some other stuff. So yeah, the number 1 red flag is make sure that you don't have an incorrect founding team, because again, that's what investors are looking at. They're not really investing in the company. They're investing in the founders, making sure that they're the right folks to do the right thing.
What do you think about High Times?
I think High Times with $100 million in debt and being not understanding the market, not understanding the investors, which is number 2 and number 3 on the 7 tips to a successful investment deck. High Times has failed those. So you're going to charge people to buy the magazine when all of your competition is giving away for free. Does that mean you're not getting enough from your advertisers? I think they are incredibly slow to keep up with the sign of the times. And they just kept with growing rather than switching to a consumer market with culture and dabbing and these other things. They just kept throwing out, this is how you grow. And YouTube has kind of fulfilled a lot of those needs and tutorials. So I would never invest your money in High Times.
I was curious.
I'm a subscriber.
And that's the other thing too. So number 2 on the 8 red flags when pitching to investors is baggage. If you have a lot of debt and no vesting requirements for the owners, like people at MedMen, for example, and there's a messy cap table. I won't name names, but in Washington State, they took money from a famous investor, and he had 200 investors underneath him. And so that syndicate makes for a very messy cap table. So when the company in Washington tried to get more, God, how do I say without, when they try to buy other things, they weren't able to because they had to get signatures from the entire syndicate, meaning all 200 people on that cap table. So again, having baggage is something that that investors aren't going to want to go after.
Yeah. And then startups don't have those baggage, but also they don't have the assets. They don't have the licenses, and so it's very difficult. So you see more conditional financing. Sure, you get the license, then we might extend you some credit.
Yeah. And so that's number 3 is you have to raise more money just to survive. So if you didn't go out and get enough money to begin with, then all of a sudden, you need more money just to keep the lights on. Nobody wants that. No one wants to get diluted from every single time you have to raise capital. And then number 4 is crazy founder salaries. Like, are you seriously buying a $26 million mansion? Like, who taught you that? That's crazy.
Isn't there an accountant though, like all these companies with CFOs and whatnot? Isn't there one person that can just see raise the red bullshit flag as far as like, hey, we're raising more than we're actually creating? We stopped looking at the creating the actual business practice. This is why we got the president we got. The man didn't make his own business. He's been running his dad's money for just like Dan Bilzerian.
In his defense, the president did make about $500 million in rights from the Apprentice, which he promptly started laundering through real estate schemes.
Gotcha. Well, again, show me the successful business. Show me the tangible Trump stake, Trump University, whatever the F. Show me something that you've done as a businessman because I mean, it's all about input output, right? Like just like losing weight is just like making money. The more you got coming in, the more you have. Period.
I feel like a broken record answering that question, Miggy, but I pull my hair out because the lack of compliance. You've probably seen it, Tom. They don't really bring in good legal advice, and they never bring in chief financial officers or financial advisors or capital market analysts. They don't, because there's too much ego involved, in my opinion. I've seen it so many times over the last 7 years where they don't have the right people in the right positions, especially when it comes to finance and compliance. It blows my mind because all of these people who think we didn't come from cannabis and we don't want to be a part of cannabis and we don't need to know what the industry is doing. And then on top of that, you don't have anybody who's going to hold you financially accountable. Really? Good luck.
Josh, prime example of that was going on in Seattle this week. I mean, I hate to be a bearer of shitty news, but you know how we have Sean Kemp. This article came out, ex-NBA. Right now they're writing off this black-owned dispensary, cannabis dispensary owner, but unfortunately, he only owns 10%. And my point being is there's going to be a lot of backlash on this one store in a local community because of what's coming up right now. So just give it a couple week or two and you're going to have marches. You're going to have shit going on out there because some dumbass was like, all right, let's just write off this guy's name. I mean, it sounds great, but he's only getting 10% just for his name. And they're writing him as a black cannabis owner. It's not.
Yeah, well, Rick Garza is on the Liquor and Cannabis Board, or he was, and he admitted that there were 2,000 businesses and many of them were black owned, but now we only have, I think, 500 or less. And so there are none. And so that's really unfortunate and, kind of a red flag if you ask me, that all of these business owners that were doing very, very well, why were they forced to close? Why weren't they given the ability to transition from medical to their rec state? And then you look at cases like this where Sean Kemp might be getting 10%, or maybe it's even less, like 2.5%. It's not the right way to do it, which is why we're seeing states like Illinois implement social equity programs. Even though it didn't work in California, when you had Ryan Kunkel of Have a Heart going down there and buying, working with a social equity applicant and then paying him off, or actually his business partner, and then selling it to High Times. So there's got to be a vesting period or some way to not defraud the social equity program and the applicants for that matter.
On top of that, the investors, because you're making shitty decisions and now people put money into you.
That's a great point, because back to that whole example with Weed Maps and the $420 million valuation, number 5 on the 8 red flags when pitching investors, Vanity Metrics. Ooh. So if you just throw out some vanity metrics like, yay, we're $420 million valuation, or our cost of acquisition, cost per customer is X, or if you don't have the right return on investment, if you don't have the right valuations, you're going to have shareholder lawsuits. Inevitably, when the price changes for Weed Maps, they will get sued by their shareholders. We've seen it up in Canada when the stock price went down, they got sued by shareholders. And it's like you kind of were told that it was not 100% guaranteed, that it is risky, and yet people are still throwing their money at it like it's a crap table.
Yeah, and they will go through your stuff, and like they will fly spec all those investment papers that you used to raise that money to go after it personally, because then you're going to say like, I don't owe it to you, the company owes it to you, not me, the company. And then they're going to say, no, you raised it wrong, and so we're going to sue the crap out of you personally and all the other founders personally and try to go after all your stuff.
And all too often, they don't understand key performance indicators. That's number 6 on the 8 red flags for pitching investors. Not understanding key performance indicators for your industry. If you don't understand the culture in cannabis, if you're part of Canopy or Aurora, that's written off $3 billion and $1 billion respectively, I would say you probably don't understand the culture. Tilray is one of those too. Brandon Kennedy doesn't smoke pot. He brags about it. And yet he's one of the worst performing stocks out there because he's literally sitting and waiting for somebody like Coca-Cola or Philip Morris or whoever to buy him out. And he doesn't understand the industry. He probably understands key performance indicators, but not as it pertains to the culture in the cannabis industry. And I think that goes and runs deep, because how are you going to know what's trending if you don't know what's going on?
Everybody wants to be the Marlboro or the McDonald's of cannabis, but yet the bar for the consumer is way up here.
Yeah.
And these industrial assholes are way down here. So
yeah, but it's just most of the people that govern these companies, I think they have Tears for Fears, that everybody wants to rule the world song just going through their heads. Like that's like their life story. They're like, yes, I'm in charge. But and that just kind of allows them to be warped in their perspective of what's actually going on. And they kind of fail to see, well, our key performance indicators, well, they meant shit because you had no understanding of the market whatsoever, because you proudly say that you do not use the product. Not sure how you ended up as the CEO, but you did.
Yeah. Number 7 of the 8 flags for pitching investors is just distractions. So when you have too many slides in your pitch deck and like a total addressable market and you go on and on about stuff, it's like, we don't care about the gabillions that you think. Just get to the point. Stay on track, stay focused. And then finally, number 8 is not asking for enough money, which is different than, raising enough money to survive. No one wants to invest when you have to get money. The difference is not asking for enough money to then dilute those shareholders. So being focused and being concise, not having a slide deck that's 30 pages, unless there's addendums or things at the very end, keeping it very relevant and to the point, I think is important.
Yep. Well, let's briefly touch on the lessons that we're going to do. I mean, so you guys can find this courses /cannabis pitch decks over at cannabisindustrylawyer.com. So we're going to start with the intro slide. We're going to throw in some legal jargon on that, mostly just names and stuff. And then there's the what's the problem slide, your team solution, the business model, market overview, market and selling, cost and pricing, competition, team, social impact. That's something we haven't really touched on yet, is that aspect of the pitch deck so that you could have in the cannabis industry in particular, is this social wellness and justice. We touched on it briefly with the banks, but the banks were like legally obligated, as opposed to like in Illinois, it was an optional social equity program. It turned out that everybody had to have those social equity points to even be in the contention. But that's also something that you should have. And then there was also the competitive advantage, like AKA your secret sauce. And then a conclusion. So really a tight pitch deck is really only going to have about 13 slides on it, right?
13 is a good number. Yeah, I would be very cautious if you're going to go beyond 15. It better be really, really good. If you're vertically integrated, then I understand, because there's a lot of aspects to touch on. But if you're an ancillary or a producer or a processor or a retailer, keep it to 15 unless you're all three, then be as concise as possible.
I'd like to also point out, too, we're in a day and age and time of the cannabis industry where now everything's Googleable. Like the person you're looking up or doing business with, like there was a time frame where the excuse was, well, we didn't know because there's no history on this person. There's no whatever. But we're at the point now where you can actually look somebody up and find out where they stand, what they've done. And then again, this goes back to the culture. And I'd like to point out that Josh and Tom, right now I'm talking to 2 guys who've made money and successfully pay their bills off cannabis industry, auxiliary stuff, right? I'm just the activist guy who just goes and cheerleads a lot of shit. So I really think that people should pay attention to you guys.
Well, thank you. I think it's important, too, to take a look at medical states, because social equity programs are important, and that's sort of what can drive the perception change. That perception management is really important. And so, Chris Martin of Hempful Farms, I think, and he's still able, being in Arizona, to give away RSO. And I think that's really cool to be able to help medical patients. that's where this altruism kind of comes from, right? That's why we're all activists turning into business professionals, because we want to help people. So that's the foundation of it. And if we can incorporate some kind of ability to help those medical patients and the community, I think it's really going to change the whole perception of cannabis being a lazy stoner drug to something that can be an active cannabis lifestyle and performance enhancing drug, if you will.
Well, there's a PGA video that just came out where they do talk about cannabis. Did you see that one?
I think you're the one who posted that, and I saw it. Yeah, that was great.
So what's in the PGA video about cannabis?
They actually intellectually discuss like how it's really not. I mean, like, so it's like yesterday we did a video with Josh and CBD, and I felt really good. And it says like, warning, may be addictive to what? Feeling good, to being better. Like, what kind of world are we living in where I can't just be well? And that's what the whole point in the PGA was. Like, so golfing to get into this epitome state of mind. That's the whole thing, like a Zen moment. But now you're telling me if I can use a plant to get to that moment faster, that's performance enhancing, to be happy.
I don't know. Are there any warning labels on like McDonald's?
Yeah.
When does my Egg McMuffin going to get a warning label if the CBD needs a warning label? Come on.
Peanuts have killed more people than goddamn marijuana.
I made the comment yesterday about how the malls have this cinnamon company and the 57 grams of fat that accompany that, and yet you wonder why we're obese. That's almost 3 times the daily fat intake from one serving for breakfast, for example. So if you get the sausage and the cinnamon thingy and the drink, then all of a sudden you have like 100+ grams of fat, and that's crazy, but you don't have the FDA going in there and regulating that.
In fact, I bet you can find farm subsidies and other corporate subsidies that are coming in to make the competition for them easier.
Mm-hmm.
God, so bad. So fucking bad, man.
Well, whole thing's rigged sometimes.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not set up for the small person. You just saw Wells Fargo wanting to eliminate matching their 401ks, and it wasn't the tellers that were revolting. It was the people making $250,000 or more that had a swift feedback for the executives, and then they immediately reversed course because of the backlash. And the backlash didn't happen from the people in the bank; it happened from the executives, and that's what's really unfortunate, that we have to be careful in the cannabis industry to not allow.
Well, the state of cannabis itself, too, because in the medical states, you have people who have to have balls bigger than life to be involved in the industry, right? To step in front of the camera, to do anything, to say, yes, I agree that we should all be able to do this.
Right.
And not be villainized.
We got to band together. I mean, it starts with a good business plan and a good pitch deck and the solid founders and the right amount of money. And if we don't band together individually, we're going to fail. So maybe, consolidation or forced, capitulation is a good thing. And then eventually these big companies are going to either lose popularity, but once the market matures and we can have the equivalent of these craft brewers, mm-hmm. where we have a discerning flavor that people actually want to consume. I don't want, Tilray's weed. I want to smoke like homegrown cannabis, like really good stuff. Why do I have to like walk around a homeless encampment and be like, that smells so good?
Right. How come I can't get blueberry muffin down the road? I had to wait until Croptober, and now suddenly, the muffins are done. You're like, wow. That's amazing. That's genetics, I
never smell anything from a rec shop and be like, oh, damn, that is fire. But every time I walk by a homeless encampment, I'm like, what are they smoking?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That's so funny.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we go to find and follow what you got going on at the Talking Hedge?
All of your favorite MP3, MP4 formats, just look at the Talking Hedge or at the TalkingHedgePodcast.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up with all cannabis legalization news. And tune in this Wednesday. We're going to be speaking with Andrew D'Angelo about the Last Prisoner project. So that should be a fun episode.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Josh.
Peace.